Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper Cube commentators, Michael Petchek and Adam Styborski. How's it going, Adam?
It's going pretty good.
All right, so obviously, as folks at home can tell, Adrian is not with us this week. He got a little vacation from the show this week, but Adam is here, and Adam has been a long-standing member of the Cube community. So, Adam, let's get this out of the way. A brief introduction. Who are you in the community? Some of your background, where you came into this whole content creation business from.
Sure. So I kind of go way back. I've actually been a writer for Wizards of the Coast as a contractor for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years this November. So doing serious fun, casual content, Commander. I've done Grand Prix coverage, Pro Tour coverage, all sorts of eventing documentation, things like that. I've had the privilege of covering the World Championship, World's Week in Nice, France, doing some really cool things for Wizards. But my heart and soul is in Commander and Limited and kind of one card per deck formats. It's a lot of fun for me to get into that side of Magic. It's puzzly, it's fun, it's exciting. There are things that I really enjoy about it. So I got into cubing from Eric Klug. He introduced me to cubing at my local game store when he was in Maryland and I lived there. And there was a powered cube. There's Eric Klug's amazing common uncommon cubed. I highly recommend that cube if you're looking for something in between kind of powerful rares and not just commons. But there wasn't an all commons cube, and I'm like, well, I can do this. I can build this. And so that was 10 years ago, and here we are after podcast guesting and running content sites and writing articles and working on this cube and updating it for the past decade.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I think I've been reading your articles at this point for about 6 years. So, wow, that actually is a disturbing thing to realize. But yeah, it's been about six years of checking in on your articles, and for a while I did maintain a copy of your cube. I have since deviated from it, but I mean,
everybody's wrong from time to time. It's fine.
I'm never sending you my cube list just out of sheer fear of how upset you might get at some of the choices I've made. But we're not here to talk about that. You're here for one very specific reason, and I'd love for you to get the obligatory gloating period out of the way here. Why are you here?
Because I'm better at judging how much Wizards is going to push a mechanic.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a prop bet over in Stibbs's Pauper Cube Discord, and I claimed that we would get. So what we had at that point, we'd seen Imperious Oligarch, the 2-mana 2/1 Afterlife Vigilance thing. And I said that we were going to get one more reasonable Afterlife card. And instead we got 3 different almost okay ones?
I think there's one that's almost okay. And the others are correctly costed for limited.
So I think, what is it? The Knight of Sorrows with an extra point of power and toughness would be sweet. The 5-mana 4/4... can block an extra creature thing.
It's a 5-mana 3/3. If it was a 4/4, yes, I think it'd be much closer. But it's a 5-mana 3/3 that has Afterlife 1. Yeah. If it was Afterlife 2 or a 4/4, I think those numbers make it much more impressive. But my assessment looking at Oligarch, seeing it as a 2/1, they've been pushing the rate on the multicolor cards because it's a guild set, it's a multicolor set. Those multicolor cards are your payoff. The monocolor cards should be more flexible to kind of be between archetypes. That was based off of my observation from Guilds of Ravnica. So I thought about, okay, if this card looks pushed at common, because it was keyword soup, 2/1 Vigilance, Afterlife for 2, they're not going to do that type of, power on other commons. And the closest... I should have pulled it up. It was like a 2/3 bird for 4 mana with Afterlife 1. So you get a 2/3 flyer for 4 mana, which is pretty meh overall, and then you just get a 1/1 if it dies. You can't get the 3 power on the battlefield flying all at the same time. And like that, I think is like marginally close enough that I thought about it, in passing as, man, I wish the stats on this were flipped. Like a 3-2 would have just been a much closer card. So play design, props, I think they did a really great job dialing in Afterlife, because making 1/1 spirits is really good if you've ever cast Battle Screech.
Yeah, it was very close. Like the 2 of the commons were like just a little bit off, but yeah, in the end, Imperious Oligarch was the only one that was really cubable, and the rest were very close. But yeah, that's why Stibs is here, because I run my mouth in other people's servers, and at the end of the day, I get to have a really solid guest on the show. All right, so
now I'm going to tell you a secret.
What?
I'm going to share it with you and your listeners. So after we made the prop bet, I got pitched to do the follow-up Commander article, because I did one for Wizards on Guilds of Ravnica, and so I'm doing the counterpart for Ravnica Allegiance. So after we locked in the prop bet, I got to see all the cards in the set, and I knew I won, but I had to sit on it. I couldn't tell you or gloat until the full reveal.
Oh man, that feels that is the worst of rub-ins. Oh man. Oh, all right. Well, so yeah, that's why you're here. Let's actually talk a little bit about Pauper Cube, because you kind of gave us some of the background on it. And I guess, like, how's the cube evolved over the years? So I've heard that it started mainly as a gold-focused cube, and it is shifted reasonably far away from that at this point.
I mean, we're currently returning to the mean, if you want to look at it that way. But so originally, when I started the cube, like, Shards of Alara was new. Like, that was, like, the newest set, and I was so pumped. I'm like, oh my gosh, gold is amazing. And then the next set had more gold. And then the last set was all gold. I don't know if you were there for that, but it was literally Mark Rosewater got to preview one card early, and it was a gold card with an A name, and the set number was 1. And people figured out what that meant. So I was pumped for gold. I was hyped, super excited. I'm like, let's do this. So I basically like had a ton of artifacty stuff and all the bounce lands and signets, a bunch of multicolor stuff, and it was terrible. It was just absolutely awful, because this was before the second Ravnica set. This was before the third Ravnica set. Now this was before Khans of Tarkir. Like, bad. There was just not great multicolor. So basically, I had a come to Cube Jesus moment with Eric Klug, and it's why I credit Eric Klug, and I'll constantly refer back to him and talk to him about my cube. Not because he's known as an altarist, which he's amazing at painting on Magic cards. Not because he's a pretty strong limited player. He was always a ringer on pre-release nights, and he almost day 2'd a Star City Invitational with a 1-of standard deck.
Wow.
Yeah, like he was literally like the last match of the day off. So he has some fun. He's a really great player, but more importantly, I think he's got a really good nose for limited. He's the one that maintains the Pro Tour cube, adding those. He did a zombie cube. He created a custom Breaking Bad cube. He learned from like the Tom Lapilli, Sam Stoddard, like the mid, the Columbus area, Ohio area Magic community, where a lot of the cubing kind of really grew from here in the States. So his cube lineage, if you want to, put on your royal robes and go down who taught what about cubing, is pretty good. But more importantly, he was good enough and kind enough to literally sit down and go through my entire cube and explain what was going wrong. Hey, you're not looking at the curves, the payoffs, the rate that you're getting for a lot of these cards isn't good enough. So, you've got a lot of 2/4s and a lot of bad 6-mana removal spells, and it's just not going to play well. So helped me prune it down, encouraged me to revisit, a focus on monocolors, really get the curve down, and that's what I focused on for the first couple of years of the cube. It wasn't even really archetype focused. It was still meant to be just the most powerful cards I could find at common, but with a curve in mind. And from there, I went through some cool experiments and kind of tried to figure out different things I could do with the cube, different themes. And once I got a focus on archetypes kind of baked into it and said, what does each color pair do? Why does it want to do that? How does each color pair look to the other color pairs? What are the overlaps? How do those overlaps look? And thinking about the intersections of the different colors and what cards could go in multiple decks and how that would be a better play experience than just a strictly strong card. Looking at cards like Fireball, which is just, oh, game over. Does that lend itself to a play sequence? Is there a different card I can use that can maybe close out a game or is maybe really powerful, but isn't just I tap out and you lose right now? So the shift to archetypes into a shift on play experiences kind of led to kind of the modern philosophy I have updating the cube today.
Because I was going to say, I remember when I was maintaining a copy of your cube, I believe that was the era where you had like a decent chunk of hexproof things and auras as like the blue-green theme, and also some pretty egregious Tempest block mistakes, such as Rolling Thunder, I believe, was in for a while.
Yeah, Rolling Thunder is one of the most powerful commons ever printed, just like Pestilence. But yeah, it was green and white had kind of like the Bogles theme, and blue could kind of dip into it a little bit with some of the I had Slippery Bogle in the cube. I had some of the other, a couple blue hexproof things, a couple blue, like a good blue enchantment or two, and you could do like a Bant hexproof thing, and it was great. It did exactly what I thought it was going to do, which was smash control decks. But it also, as a byproduct, literally smashed anything that cared about using removal to stay in the game, and did exactly what Bogles does. And it was not the archetypes for some of the colors have definitely shifted as a result of feedback about the play experiences that they've generated.
Yeah, because that was definitely one of the sort of more insular, not fully parasitic, because like the auras were fine, and most of the hexproof creatures that I remember being in there were mostly on rate and could be played reasonably well in any deck that could cast them. But when that deck came together, it was just like, okay, cool, someone drafted the hexproof deck. I really just hope I don't get paired with them, and I hope if I do, I've got at least a couple of edict effects to like hopefully make this not miserable. So yeah, I definitely think like that was a pretty sizable improvement to the cube from a personal level. But I guess, are there any other like notable like large shifts that you went through in regards to archetypes or cutting whole large sections that worked particularly well?
Yeah, so a couple things a couple major kind of shifts, and I kind of hit, some of these are controversial and like are their own article episode of Mike and I going off a deep end somewhere. But one of the big major shifts that I looked at was when I took out signets and bounce lands, which are definitely awesome and really great cards, and definitely make a Pauper cube feel more like a traditional rare cube or powered cube. You just get good mana fixing. It's available everywhere. It's basically card advantage baked in. You get to do ramp into silly things. You get to splash really powerful cards. So it creates a Pauper cube that feels more like a more powerful cube that you might be familiar with. But the problem was that I discovered was that tendency had, kind of conflicted with making the archetypes viable. Why would you draft, more of an archetype or be a little more disciplined or focused in a draft when you could just draft really powerful mana fixing and really powerful 2-for-1s with it? So there's some, there's basically a fork in the road that I took. I decided to take, a fork away from that and go, I want to make a cube experience that's feels a little bit more like a good core set limited. I think that's probably like the best way to distill to one statement that defines how I try to make the cube feel. Good core set limited. Every color pair has an identity. Every color pair does what it does. None of the color pairs are, overwhelmingly powerful against the others. Some are, have good advantages, some have disadvantages, but ultimately it's meant to feel more like traditional limited that you would find in booster packs rather than, a rare cube. And that was intentional, right? I had a rare cube nearby I could play with. I had a common uncommon cube with much better dual lands that I could play with. So the experience I was trying to create was different from these other experiences I had at the time.
So I guess one of the things I'm a little curious about is, because you have been publishing articles about this fairly niche topic. I think it's pretty much you and Usman, and that's it as far as like people who routinely cover Pauper cubes. So I guess because you are in the spotlight for this smaller community, do you feel that in part removal of powerful things like the signets and the bounce lands is also somehow influenced by the fact that people are building this cube and this could be someone's first cube experience? And I mean, I think it goes without saying, like, more experienced cubers, if they see bounce lands and signets, are going to take them much higher because they understand what they can do. So I guess, like, is that also an example of a play experience thing that helps balance it out for people who are playing along at home and building this cube for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big aspects that I kind of approach with my cube is I'm really open to feedback. I want to hear about good play experiences and bad play experiences. I want to hear strong opinions about cards. I think you're certainly witness to this in the community Discord. I mean, it's less than a year old, but it's very active, and we have great discussions, not arguments, not internet yelling. Although I have your quote pinned that cubing is just Magic discussion with more shouting and spreadsheets. It certainly feels that way on like the Magic, the Cube subreddit and the old MTG Salvation Cube forums. I was in those places. I remember those spaces, and I didn't like them. And I'm very grateful that I have an awesome community that is willing to, hey, Sibs, I put bounce lands in my cube. Okay, we don't have like a fundamental, breakdown between discussion around it, but the feedback that I've gotten as I've moved closer and closer, basically as I doubled down and tripled down on this philosophy of, a really great core set limited. I'll use that as my kind of key phrase for that. The feedback has gotten better. More people have been building the cube. More people have been introducing friends to the cube who build it. The professor, picked up my cube and talked about it. And, there's always people that comment about it or look at it and are like, I radically disagree with many of the decisions here. Great. Like, I've created a custom limited environment with a requirement that I'm looking at commons only. We're not going to come to the same conclusion, and I'm okay with that. But I've consistently received better and better feedback and better engagement with the cube, with this philosophy. And I think because it is a little more beginner friendly, it's a little more, I can show this to my friends. It's a little more, hey, my buddy hasn't played in 6 months. He can pick it up, see a couple new commons, and have fun with it, is a net positive for the cube. It's just what I've heard.
I guess I find it like very interesting that you refer to your cube or any like Pauper cube that I've played in the past as like reminiscent of a core set. Having like recently drafted M19 on Arena, like I don't know, that's never the vibe I've gotten from it. It definitely is more reflective of your typical limited environment than, say, like Powered Cube. Like Powered Cube is a completely different animal, and if we're being completely honest, I don't understand or care for it. But I don't feel like core set is exactly where I personally would have placed it. I feel like the complexity level is up just enough that it feels more in like the realm of like something like Khans of Tarkir, but not as complex as something like Dominaria, where like you could go very deep in that format, and a bunch of people did, but it feels like it's got like a little bit more complexity than that. But I that might just be me as well.
It is. I think I think the reason I use that is because it was when I reflected on, I believe it was Magic 2012. Was one of the, I don't think it was 2011, it might have been 2012, I don't think it was 2013 with Bloodthirst, I think it was 2012, but there's a core set kind of early in kind of the modern core set history where every color pair had a thing and it had its identity, but the pros loved drafting it. It had this great level of the right balance of appropriate simplicity where you can kind of get what's going on and understand it, but with the depth to do something more complex. Like I have designated archetypes in the cube, but I've seen, Esper Tempo. I've seen Grixis Control with burn spells and, blue finishers with like, a Pestilence package thrown in with, high toughness creatures. I've seen amazing, one of the most recent decks I've seen that I got smashed by was like a Sultai deck off the back of Cavern Harpy and a bunch of Enter the Battlefield effects. And like, I couldn't beat the deck when it was stuck at 3 mana for 7 turns. It just, every card had the density of value and enough synergy where a very experienced Magic player who was very experienced at formats could extract the kind of complexity and depth. I watched Sam Black draft out of my cube a Bant aggro deck with like Travel Preparation and Looter Il Core. Like it just...
Ooh.
Yeah, like that. There's just the density of power. When you can make slightly better picks throughout the cube, and you're picking the synergistic cards together, you can do some really powerful, cool things that are outside the rails, so to say. And so I think that exists. But my goal was somebody can sit down, get a 1-minute rundown of what the archetypes are in the cube and what it's about, and basically have fun. Have a reasonable deck, have a reasonable play experience, and not feel like they have to learn, kind of its own format, like Powered Cube, I think is a good example of it's kind of its own beast, and it's not constructed, it's not quite limited, it's kind of its own thing.
Yeah, like I love watching people who understand it draft Powered Cube. I a while ago, some folks I knew who had proxied up like the current Mitgo Vintage Cube invited me over, and I was just like completely lost. I wound up just like drafting like mono red because I was just like, I know how this deck works. Like I don't understand how Time Spiral like single win con decks work. So and like obviously with the fact that I create Pauper content, I'm obviously kind of not forced into, but it made sense to own a Pauper cube. And it's actually interesting that you brought up Pestilence like several times. I think that's actually one of the things that's on my potential cutting block really soon. I think that's actually one of those cards where I've finally realized that since, and this might be different in your experience, since that cube is one that I've used to introduce a lot of people as like their sort of first cube, I've found that Pestilence by and large gets the worst reactions out of players who have not experienced it before, and also those players don't tend to realize what it does when they see it in a pack. I don't know. I think that's one of like the sort of the most powerful commons ever printed, or one of the biggest like mistakes at common. But I guess is Pestilence just forever safe in your cube?
I mean, nothing's forever safe. Like I've cut some crazy cards. Like, why would you cut that? How could you do that? I'm unafraid to cut cards that feel like they need to be cut. The reason I feel it's so safe, and the reason I look at it is I don't design my cube to protect players from being able to make card evaluation mistakes, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of what you're talking about is if you're using it as kind of like an introduction to cube, or kind of a welcoming cube where you use it with like a mixed work group that have learned to play Magic, once or twice and they're ready to have some fun tonight. Yeah, you're going to want a different design philosophy for it. But honestly, it's one of the really few things that can be a great sweeper. If you want to build a control deck, you're going to need, effects like Pestilence or other ways that you can get multiples for one in order to kind of take over a game at some point. And I feel strongly that, it's not overwhelming and powerful. I've drafted the Pestilence deck and been beaten, and I've, played decks and beaten Pestilence. And it does come with its drawbacks like any really powerful card, mm-hmm. But I feel confident that having a sweeper, a reasonable sweeper type effect, a reasonable control kind of anchor is just as important as having something, like an Eldrazi finisher for a ramp deck. Something that's going to hit really hard, close out a game, and give the deck, a one-off payoff that it kind of needs.
All right, that I can see where you're coming from with that. And I guess I might as well segue into this question I put down here, because we're talking about some of the very best, and I wanted to know what are some of the worst cards that you've ever run in your cube, and what did you learn from running those cards and then cutting them?
All right, so I've got two stories. The first one is a pretty recent one. So for quite a while, I had strip mine in my cube. And somebody's going to go, but wait, strip mine's not a common. And they push their glasses up and they're reaching for the keyboard to leave a nasty comment. This guy's an idiot. He doesn't even know what a common is, and he's running a common cube. So being friendly with Wizards folks and being around the contracting environment long enough, I've had some interesting interactions. And one of them was, taking a cab ride with former rules manager Matt Tabak. And Matt Tabak's a gregarious character that's kind of willing to have some fun and push some envelopes and generally be a good sport about stuff. And one of the things that he noted was, because it came up because I was talking to Sam Stoddard about this as well, was, basically what makes a card a common is the rarity sheet it's printed on, which, technically leads to some really weird nonsensical things like, well, what's the rarity sheet of Commander set? Is it all rare? Is it all common? It's technically fixed, which is none of the rarities. So there's a whole deep end if you take that as like canon, but it's actually really just relevant for some of Magic's earliest sets, like the Dark, Antiquities, Arabian Nights. They had some cards printed on the common set, common sheet, and some printed on the uncommon sheet. Some printed on the uncommon sheet once or twice, and some on the common sheet, once or twice, the multiple art cards. And so one of the versions of Strip Mine was actually printed on the common sheet. And so technically, which is the best kind of correct, technically, Strip Mine was a common. And so I put it in the queue because I wanted to have really cool, powerful cards. It was a really great card, for aggressive decks. There isn't any comes into play untapped land for a Boros deck, right? Mm-hmm. Like that just doesn't exist at common. It'll probably never exist at common. But hey, strip mining your control opponent, strip mining your mid-range opponent, strip mining your ramp opponent, and buying an extra turn for your tokens to do their work, that sounds like a pretty good payoff for an aggro deck. So it felt like an appropriate kind of thing to put in there. It was a powerful card that I could kind of push the envelope with. And so what I learned is Magic players have opinions, and they share them with you. So... I learned that people were really kind of turned off, like, of all the things where it's like, okay, well, I can understand including common uncards that aren't on Magic Online, or commons that are common in paper but aren't printed on, aren't quote unquote printed as a common on Magic Online. Like, I can get that. Those are commons, but this is not a common. Like, come on. Like, are you kidding me? And so for the longest time, I had the tweet where, like, Matt Tabak is, like, arguing with a guy on Twitter for me saying that embedded, because, I put things on my tombstone all the time that I regret. And, basically what happened was twofold. One is it increasingly was a point of feedback where people really didn't like that kind of ultra technical, like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like, okay, it's really not a common. Come on, man. But also Strip Mine, went from being like a $2 common, uncommon, whatever you want to call it in whiteboarder, to like a $15 card. So not only was it an obnoxiously, technically, really not probably a common, but it was also an expensive one. And so, basically it was a marginal value add to the cube. It's already not necessarily the best play experience. Like, oh, hey, I'm stuck on 2 lands. Oh, and my opponent just played Strip Mine as their 4th land. I know what's happening next.
Yep.
So it doesn't necessarily lend itself to great play experiences. It was a really expensive card. So it was doing, not that being expensive is a reason to cut a card, but in addition to all of the friction and marginal value it was adding to the cube, it was it was conflicting with people who were really just looking for, to get some commons and have some fun with friends. And as an overall net, cutting that card recently was just great. Like, nobody lamented Strip Mine leaving except for me, as I take like my From the Vault version out, and I'm like, well, I guess maybe I'll put you in a commander deck now. Like, it is what it is.
Only From the Vault? Come on, man. The expedition exists.
I mean, I put it in before the expedition existed. So,
yeah.
another card.
That is always one of the catches of having a cube. You find the fancy foil version, and then they print a fancier, foilier version.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about kind of like the decision tree I use for which version of a card I use, because it's pretty hard and fast. Maybe as like a bonus later. But another card that I had in the cube that I kind of bounced in, and I think I cut it with the very next update when I looked at it, was Mana Prism. So Mana Prism was a common, I believe, in Vintage Masters.
Oh, is this that bizarre like that thing? Is
yeah,
this
so it was
the token one, the counter one?
No,
sorry.
No. It's it's a card by I actually own the artist proof now because Margaret Organ Keene was at a Grand Prix that I was at late last year. But Mana Prism is a 3 mana rock where it can give you colorless mana or filter 1 mana to any color.
Okay.
So it's not a super efficient mana rock, but the reason I added it was because at the time I was just beginning to grapple with, okay, so there's these like 3 color decks that, that are still kind of persistent and people still really draft towards. So, I thought the issue was the colorless mana fixing. I thought the issue was with, things that made it too easy to just play any color off of colorless cards. I wasn't looking at the green mana ramping cards. I'm like, well, Kadama's Reach is sacrosanct, right? Like, why would I ever think about cutting Kadama's Reach? A land that takes you from green into 3 colors instantly. Not always the smartest horse at the water trough, but I thought, okay, great, I'll put this in. This is a great way to take out a more powerful piece of common, colorless mana fixing, downgrade it so it still works for ramp, because everybody wants to play 3 mana for 1 colorless mana rock, but it can still filter. And it was just bad. I mean, it was just it was the wrong answer because I wasn't asking the right question. Right? I wasn't asking the question of why am I enabling so many colors out of any green deck? Instead, I was focused on the cards that that I didn't take the blinders off. I saw the signets and thought colorless mana fixing was generally always the problem for multicolor nonsense at common, and it really wasn't. It was other enablers that I had in the cube. The green based 4 color decks were where those were coming from. So I learned to not just look for answers, but also to double check my question. And I think that that's kind of one of the big reasons I lean so much into feedback is somebody with a radically different perspective and play experience is going to ask a very different question. And it's worth thinking about that, because if I haven't asked it or I haven't thought about the answer to that, maybe I missed something. And that was what I learned from Mana Prism.
I do also like, since I have it up in the background in your change log for your cube, you do have a note next to when you cut Mana Prism that just says "Yup" with like 10 U's in it, which I got a little chuckle out of. Okay, cool. Those are both like pretty solid things, and I mean, along with Strip Mine, also notably Maze of Ith and Mishra's Factory were in there for quite a while.
I wanted to have really powerful cards, and honestly, Maze of Ith never really felt that powerful, particularly as I started ramping up token strategies. But it was basically just giving a land to any control deck that wanted it that said gain 8 life this game, gain 10 life this game. And
on top of that, it's not really a land, right? Because it doesn't produce any mana, so it's just kind of a weird one. Although Mishra's Factory, I can see an argument for including it just because I do want a creature land in here somewhere, right?
Yeah, but and it was great. I mean, fortunately, we got Guardian Idol, which fills a very, very similar role. And so that effect I think is great. And from a development standpoint, I was really happy to see Guardian Idol get downshifted in Iconic Masters.
I think that was Iconic. Yeah,
it was Iconic Masters right, alongside Star Compass. I spend way too much time looking at commons.
But trust me, I'm right there with you. I've lived in this personal hell of like, not being able to remember things that happened 10 years ago, but being able to remember very niche commons from bad limited formats.
But yeah, the first time I saw somebody pay to use Guardian Idol, block after blockers that's going to trade with Guardian Idol, tapping Guardian Idol in another land to kill yet another attacker, and basically, stretch the max value in combat out of a Guardian Idol, I felt better. I'm like, okay, great. This is what it's meant to do.
Yeah, and that was definitely like that's in my Pauper cube, and that was one of the ones where it was just like, yeah, this just gets in. This feels good. I like what it does. It has multiple places where it fits, and I think that was just great. But yeah, and master sets are always big for like the constructed Pauper community, but I've actually noticed over the years that you get just about as many things out of standard sets these days as you do from the masters sets, and I think that's kind of interesting. I've noticed that how much recently you did the Q&A for the Ravnica Allegiance spoilers. How many cards did you talk about?
That is an excellent question.
Like 15?
Well, the update is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do you want to know the number of Ravnica Allegiance cards or just cards in general?
Specifically Ravnica Allegiance. Because, yeah, I know there's a couple of older things that are sneaking in. It's got to be at least... It's more than 10.
It's 13.
13. There you go. Okay, so you had 13 out of the
13 plus two older cards, so 15 total cards in the update.
So out of the last set, when we did our set review, I think there were 2 cards that we legitimately had discussions to be had about, and that has been the trend for constructed Pauper for quite some time. So I think part of me just maintains a Pauper cube so I can get really excited about sets again in standard, but I don't know. So you've talked a lot about like feedback, and about a year ago you started a Patreon, and as a result there was a Discord, and you've had a ton of people joining in. You provided Cube as a service, which I thought was a really great idea as a selling point for people who just want to update their cube and not think about it. But what has having that sort of very instant feedback changed about your approach to cube design and your process for making updates? Because like even with Twitter is still slower than Discord.
Yeah, the 2 major things that have really changed, because I wouldn't say my overall direction or philosophy has changed, but the 2 things that have is my sense of urgency when new cards are revealed, right? When the Friday full reveal happens, there's always a slew of interesting new commons that just aren't part of a preview plan from Wizards, right? Like nobody wants to talk about, I think great cards that weren't included this time around in previews were Law Mage's Binding, Arrester's Admonition was, I think Savage Smash wasn't talked about.
I think a good chunk of the gold cards actually hadn't even made it out.
Yeah, like, Burning Tree Vandal, like those are all excellent cards that really aren't going to be, probably aren't standard applicable, definitely not an older format, aren't exciting for Commander, aren't exciting for even probably Pauper Constructed.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of get overlooked, but for my purposes, I've got a very different kind of environment, and those effects are things that I'm looking for, that I need to find. So for me, the urgency is to review all of the new commons, any downshifts, because every, I think it's been a while, but every now and then they'll reprint a card at a lower rarity in a standard release. I can't think of off the top of my head the last one, but it is the exception rather than the rule. But they always have some awesome cards in there that might have potential for the cube. So what I do is I create my quick hits, and as a for patrons, because so many people want to support the cube, I I have this urgency to that night. I've got to get this quick hits up, and it's always up close to midnight because life always throws something at me the day the set's released. Like I'm always like, one time I was at a pro tour traveling.
Oh no.
And like another time I'm on like a work trip, and another time like my daughter's really sick and I take her to the doctor, and so there's always something going on. But I'm urgent to get that up because the second part is I get so much more feedback faster. That instant, basically almost instant feedback means that I can do a quick pass instead of simply just having, left to my own devices, maybe a couple conversations with local Magic players, maybe reading somebody else's take on cards and kind of synthesizing, a much smaller set of information and perspectives. I can get a lot more feedback. And it's part of why I added, the PTR, the patron test realm. If you're into live services for your video games, you know what a PTR is. It's where changes, are shown before they roll out to everyone and people give feedback on them. So just this I'm able to iterate on multiple waves of feedback very quickly. I can get feedback pre-release weekend. Hey, who played with these cards? How did it feel? How didn't it feel? What was good about it? This time, we're talking after the release of the set. And I have had the luxury of basically like 2.5 weeks of people playing with cards to work with for feedback. And it's been a really huge benefit to iterate very quickly off of that, which gives me more confidence. I can find better answers and make better decisions because there are cards that I originally had on my update that I ended up taking off. There are cards that I changed. Aeromunculus was a kind of a contentious one for me, but everyone's like, yeah, no, man, slam that in. This is not hard. And I'm like, okay, but like, you understand that there's a significant textural difference, even if both check off many of the same directional boxes for pointing what, blue-green should do as an archetype against Beetleform Mage. And it's just like, no, give us the Simic horror, please. Thank you. We just want to fly. We just want to fly now. Okay. Like I get that instantaneity. I get the feedback cycle, and I get that engagement, and I think that's really the biggest thing. Is I feel a little more confident in my changes, and I get better changes overall.
And sometimes you even get changes reversed, because there was the whole thing where you had slated to cut Dinrova horror out of the Dimir section, and people were like, no, please cut Recoil instead, and you put it up to a vote, and there was a whole huge discussion. And I remember just seeing like the little Discord badge lighting up every 2 seconds as people were like, no, like I need to discuss this. And I remember that being a particularly long-winded discussion that I think ended well. But
yeah, and it was a lot of fun because like I think of Recoil as just like the iconic multicolored card. It's just the perfect. I mean, Mark Rosar uses an example all the time. So #fanboy, WotC shill, whatever. But like it is this perfect blend of you get a blue effect, you get a black effect, and together they do something incredibly potent. It's just such a unique intersection, and I really like that. It's a trick. It's a good trick for blue black. It's an instant. It's such an iconic card. But when you staple that to a 4/4 body, people really like to do that instead. I think it's just because people like to blink Dinrova horror more than anything, and they can't blink a Recoil in the cube. But that's just my #hot take.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am in that camp of like, I like blinking this. It also just eventually beats your opponent to death. Like it is a 4/4. But
yeah, it's a non-hexproof control blue-black control deck finisher, which is actually relevant. And it's big enough that you get value off of it coming in, and it can fight well on the ground. It's not like a 3/3 flyer or 3/2 flyer. There's hexproof flyers, but they're not blocking for you. Yeah. I get it. It was I think it's a better change in hindsight, but again at the time I was like, how is this even possible? Why is this contentious?
I think another thing that I'm a little curious about, and I was talking with Usman earlier about this today, was have you ever tested some amount of a combo package? Because Pauper has a handful of combos. Most of them are not super potent, and a lot of them require a lot of pieces. Has that ever been something that you have thought about including? Like, it does kind of fly in the face of a core set level of like interaction, but is that something you've ever thought about adding into the cube?
Yes and no. So there is a blink sub-theme in the cube. It's not something I particularly work at honing, but when you care about creatures that have enter the battlefield's effects, those are the more powerful creatures in general in limited. You end up supporting it incidentally. Like Momentary Blink is in my cube. Could I have a different white-blue card in that slot that's, a little more specific tempo-oriented that clears a blocker away or otherwise gives you some tempo advantage in like a blue-white deck or something? Yeah, I could probably find a different card to slot in there. But, people really like to do this, like bounce a creature and return to hand. Core Skyfisher is still in the cube. Often bounces a creature and gets value off of that. There's some of the bounce creatures like Mana Wars and stuff returning a Dinrova Horror to replay it next turn to keep an opponent locked down, is not necessarily out of the bounds of what's reasonable. So, a deck like Esper, Esper enter the battlefield value, if you want to get really clinical with the name of it, but it's in there, but it's supported only in that the other cards just exist to make it possible for somebody to kind of pull that together and have some fun with that. Like I've definitely drafted that in like the black-white deck where I've got the flicker effects and the not the Journey into Nowhere. I'm trying to remember the name of the white instant where it comes back at the end of the turn and the end of the turn has a plus
Otherworldly Journey.
Yes, yeah. I remember effects. I'm terrible with remembering card names. But Otherworldly Journey. So I've drafted that kind of deck, and it's a lot of fun to Otherworldly Journey your the 2/3. Yeah, see, this is why I should have my cube thing. That gains you life.
Aven Riftwatcher.
Yeah, I've Otherworldly Journey, Aven Riftwatcher, and gained 8 life off of one, and hit the opponent for like 10 or 12 in the air, with it. That's like a thing that you can do, and it's a lot of fun. I've seen the Sultai, Cavern Harpies in blue-black. Like, I could probably run, like, Probe or Recoil. Like, I could run a more proactive or a more control-oriented card, but Cavern Harpy does a lot of cool, interesting things. It lets you play around with enter the battlefield effects. So there is like this sub-theme of supporting creative things that you can do and value-oriented things, just generically. But I once watched Eric Klug test adding a combo package to his common uncommon cube, and to test it, he did 2 drafts. He seeded all of the pieces in, and waited to see what happened. And it's really, really challenging to put combos in when you don't have enough redundancy for them. Redundancy is something I've written about with the Pauper cube before. It's why I have multiples of the same effect, because it's twofold. One, it ensures that the things that support archetypes appear in enough numbers that you can reasonably have an opportunity to see to draft it. But more importantly, too, it also reflects actual limited. You're going to see multiple copies of cards with Riot, cards that care about spells, cards that care about a keyword in your basic booster pack sets. The way to replicate that in a cube is to ensure that there's multiple cards that are similar enough in effect that are in alignment with the archetype. And so that's why I've got like multiple rampant growth effects. If I want to support a ramp deck, I'm going to need to reasonably assume the ramp deck can get 2 or 3 ways to do that. Probably more like 5 through some combination of green spells and maybe a mana rock or 2. And that mix of having enough of the cards appear in a draft requires having enough copies in the cube. So the reason I don't do some of the cooler combo-y stuff where like there's the Black Enchantment where it's basically like a reverse.
Oh, the Spiteful Shadows combo?
No, it's I call it the Alex Ullman special because we both dream about it being really good. It's the you get to discard a card and return a creature card from your graveyard.
Tortured Existence. Yeah,
Tortured Existence. I was almost going to have Eric Klug do an altar of a picture of my wife and I's photo of our wedding bands.
Oh no! Come on, man.
Well, that's the joke. It's Tortured Existence, haha. But that type of effect can lend itself to some really cool sort of interactions, and you can do some stuff with it. But it's so hard to support combos that really rely on a specific card or two interacting, simply because you can't really reasonably pair them. And so you have to balance. For me, I had to choose whether I wanted to have cards that would just be completely dead and just be totally unplayable without kind of the combo counterpart. And then you still have to have them in the same deck, and you have to draw them both in the same game. Oh, and you don't have enough card filtering and tutor effects to reasonably pull it up anyway. Or I could just focus on kind of softer ways, and, thematically, a Flicker deck is redundant simply because there's a lot of enter the battlefield creatures in the cube. It gets to stay. I don't see, like, Storm being a thing I could do.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking Storm. I had been thinking about this for a while, and I think that there were two combos I could come up with that have a level of redundancy. Neither of these have a lot of redundancy, but the first was the infamous, like, Bane of Pauper constructed, is the Ghostly Flicker with either the untapped land creatures. So you've got Peregrine Drake, Cloud of Fairies, you have Ghostly Flicker and Displace now, and you also have, I think, 4 different mnemonic wall effects at this point. So there's a level of redundancy there, and the other one is the weird Persist combo with Ivy Lane Denizen, which has the big issue that one of its pieces has exactly 0 redundancy. But I don't know. I'd been tinkering with the idea. The catch is then you kind of have to open the gates to... You need something to do with the infinite mana and the Flicker combo, and that probably leads to you just slotting in a fireball effect or 2, and that's the point where you start changing stuff dramatically. But I kind of like the Flicker combo because none of those pieces are bad on their own in my mind. So I don't know.
So one of the early pieces of feedback I got this from a judge. I'll never forget Kyle Rick. He's a Canadian judge, awesome dude, great beard. All the good people I know have great beards. And he said he did a draft. He keeps a copy of the Pauper Cube, and he would play at his local store, and he had like John Stern and some other great professional Magic players play the cube. And one of the archetypes one of the pros would always go deep on at the time was green black, and that was when I had the buyback Raise Dead. I had the recover Raise Dead.
Why can I not come up with it? This was like my favorite card in Pauper for ages.
Yeah, so you could create pretty reasonably just a green black grind loop, and it was not hard to set up. Especially once you had, something that you could sacrifice. I think I had the 1-drop that could give something -1/-1 until end turn, so you could always trigger recover when you wanted to.
Yeah.
Even if your opponent didn't want you to trigger it, things like that were in green black, and it led to repetitive game states, and that's something I wanted to try to avoid. So. I'm not opposed to combos, but I think I would be opposed to the repetitive game state that comes from trying to loop enters the battlefield, mnemonic walls and flicker effects, and kind of doing that, because it leads to the commander effect of watching somebody combo off, and that's it's not necessarily it's bad or not fun, but I think that the novelty effect kind of wears off, and it's not necessarily intuitive for players that maybe aren't familiar with it, and it kind of just doesn't lend itself to the type of gameplay that I think is a little more engaging. The skillful player is still probably going to have a better Esper deck that's doing shenanigans, but it's not going to be a recursive loop. It's going to be advancing the game state, people attacking, flicking a flyer, doing some tricky stuff, but it's still ultimately magic that's understandable.
That is fair, because like having someone just sort of sit there and like the line of like have a wall out, have a Peregrine Drake out, flicker both of them, go infinite on your mana, get a Muldrifter involved at some point, draw your whole deck, get the other wall in play, and then just flicker 2 walls and cast a lightning bolt infinite times is perhaps not what everyone would consider like a satisfactory end to a game. But no, I can definitely see that. I'd be interested to see if at some point down the line there's something else that's viable that isn't quite so incomprehensible, but and then there's also like the true jank. Like I would not expect you to be trying to make the Freed from the Real infinite mana combo work, or what is it, Midnight Guard and Presence of Gond, because those are both deeply suspect to begin with in Constructed.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I looked at the Presence of Gone Midnight Guard combo because white green tokens is a thing, and I'm like, oh wow, I can just make all the tokens I want. I mean, at one point I had Sprout Swarm in the queue, which is, if you've never played with Sprout Swarm, you realize it's not so much a Magic card as it is a combinatorial problem.
Yeah,
and once you solve that problem, you quickly figure out how easy it is to win.
Oh man, that is up there for the biggest mistakes they've ever made at Common.
Yeah, so that was in my cube originally because, again, it was one of the most powerful cards ever printed. You know, well, I can't put slivers in because, slivers are kind of really difficult to do at Common, and mana fixing, and the only really good one's the poison sliver, and that's a boring thing. We're not doing to the giant here, but oh, Sprout Swarm, that's a powerful card. People love playing with powerful cards, and you just like see your opponent play it, and you're just like, oh, so this is how it ends. Slowly in 7 turns.
You can make it go a little faster than that, but yeah, that is the epitome of uninteractive play. All right, so I have one question that is obligatory that I think we've asked almost every guest we ever had on the podcast. If you get one non-common to downshift to common, no questions asked, what is it?
Soul Ring, so I can put power in the cube.
Oh God!
No, actually, seriously, I want the Tri-Lands downshifted.
Okay. So the guy who yells at me about the 5-color nonsense wants the most 5-color nonsense enabling lands?
A little bit. The thing is there really just isn't great mana fixing at Common. There's enter the battlefield effects. There's some things that get to fetch basic lands, and that's basically it. You get a couple green enchantments. Like, you're basically base green, and you're focused all in on making multicolor mana to make it work. And it's a little clunky at best. My theory is that if entering the battlefield tapped is a sufficient drawback for a multicolor producing land at Common, it would be nice to have to have the set of Tri-Lands. We don't need new names. We don't need 5 copies. Like with the gates, and there's 3 flavors each now of enter the battlefield tapped, give 1 of each color. But I think entering the battlefield tapped is a pretty big drawback when you've got pretty aggressive decks and pretty focused archetypes. And I think that leaning into that and providing the opportunity for, again, the same trade-off, to enter battlefield tapped, I think would be fine to have just a little bit more powerful lands at Common available for both cube and probably Constructed. I think it would help a little bit. But even there, most of the decks want to be doing something really fast, and they don't want their lands coming to play tapped. I think it's a really potent trade-off, and I think it'd be fine to have 3 colors instead of just 2.
All right, that's fair. I have for a long time struggled to try and figure out a better solution than just 3 sets of 10 duels, and I've never found anything that quite hit the spot. I know for a while you at least had one monocolored utility land for each color, right? You had I want to say Secluded Step and a couple of other weird ones, right?
Yeah, it was Secluded Step, the +2/+0, the one that
Teetering
makes
Peaks.
an 0/1 plant. For black, all of the black spell lands, honestly, are just not great. The best one is the one that exiles a graveyard, but it's moot in a cube that doesn't have a graveyard real theme or payoff. So for black, I actually used the Onslaught Cycling Land.
Yep.
Basically resource conversion. Something black is kind of good for. It was the closest fit for a spell land, but they just were meh. Nobody really, if you picked one up and you're in that color and it kind of fit for your deck, you might put it in, but the aggro decks don't want lands that come into play tapped, even if they have a spell tapped to them.
Yeah, it's really tricky because, and I know we've talked about this before off air, like one of the frustrations I've always found is the fact that like the white red duels are for splashing, and I think that including them in the cube is in some cases a trap. I definitely think that there are players who pick those for their Boros deck, and then running them is about the worst decision they can make with their pool. And I've been trying to figure this one out for a long time, and I hope that we get some weird utility land that just fits that role, and I would just be so happy. I don't know, maybe War of the Spark is another 3-color set, and we can get some nonsense.
Oh, you and your nonsense. I after thinking about that, one radical idea that came to mind, and I talk like cowards can't block warriors, and I use it as a mantra. One idea I haven't had the courage to really push through and see like where would this really go. So if the problem is that dual lands are used for splashing and generally aren't great in about half the archetypes in the cube, what if I just cut all the bad dual lands and just made people play straight up, you got to play non-basics or basic lands basically, plus like a handful of fetch lands. Like I haven't thought through, so I'm not saying that's a really good idea or a really bad idea, but it gets to the core of are just the enters the battlefield tap lands just actually not good enough, and I'm just crutched on the idea that cubes should have mana fixing. This is the best mana fixing available, therefore this is in the cube. Should I revisit the idea? That's one thing that came to mind, but I've literally spent no time like going down that rabbit hole.
I think there's an argument like to maybe trim back on it, and the issue is always like then you wind up with fewer options for utility lands, because let's be honest, most of the utility lands at common aren't good. Like what is it, the Skyline something, like there's one that like gives a creature flying, and it's just a tapped blue source, and like that's not really great for a limited environment. It's not really helping any deck out in a major way. But
yeah, the lands that I would, if I were to, if you were like, you're like, all right, Stibs, this is now the law of the land. You have to cut back on your tap lands, and you got to put different lands in. I think I would go immediately to the Amonkhet and Onslaught cycling lands, just because they have the most, the most efficiency. They basically slot into that color, and they function as a land where if you're splashing, like Muldrifter, right, into a non-blue deck, playing 2 islands and a cycling island feels like a pretty good set, because if you need the blue mana, you just play the cycling land. If you already have the blue mana, you just cycle it away. But that's super marginal. It's super lame. I think it's not adding to decks in a functional way. It's not advancing board states. It just feels like kind of like, well, why do I have to have non-basic lands in my cube? It doesn't change why I kind of asked the radical question, but that's what I would do, is I would put in the cycling lands, because I think that they would best suit the needs of helping thin out the lands and be cards that people would reasonably want to maybe put in their deck.
Yeah, and I think like I have all 3 cycles of the cycling lands sitting in my on deck binder, because they're the ones that I think about the most as possible alternatives. But I don't know, we're very close. I was very intrigued when we got Crumbling Vestige, the colorless land that produces a mana of any color when it ETBs. I thought that was like an interesting design space, where if they kind of expanded upon that idea a little bit more, something like that, where you get like a burst of fixing, and then like almost like a 1-turn like Vivid, where it's like we have 1 for each color. When it ETBs, you get to make a mana of any color, and then it just taps for 1 color, and that's it. Like something like that, I feel could be a way to sort of putting in the ones for like white and red and maybe green gives you an option to have a land that functionally ETBs untapped, but you only get 1 use of fixing out of it. So it's not going to break anything open, but it would definitely help aggro decks. Yeah, that is kind of one of the big conundrums with Pauper Cube.
Yeah, the two Pauper. If I were to add 2 lands to the cube, and say, all right, I want to design 2 lands for mana fixing. The 2 that come to mind would be like an Evolving Wilds Terramorphic Expanse, but it can tap for colorless.
Okay, so a better version of the panoramas.
Yeah, basically, panorama upgrade. Like panoramas are also like a set of lands I think would be a reasonable fit for the cube, but paying 1 mana to go fetch a land tapped is kind of whatever. So I'd like to see like enters battlefield. You can either go get a tap land, so okay, fix your color, or you just get to keep moving. And I think that's the kind of mana fixing that feels good in almost any deck. It's strictly better than Evolving Wilds, but like you'll want to play it in an aggro deck now. You might even be okay playing it on turn 1 if you have 3 2-drops in hand and the other in the complementary mana to play them. So it would feel better. The other one that I'd like to see is an Evolving Wilds, but it flips the tapping. So it enters the battlefield tapped, but then you can go get an untapped basic once it untaps.
Oh, so similar to the slow fetches from Mirage, I want to say.
Yeah, similar to that, or maybe that's the one that comes with it can tap for colorless mana. But again, they're just very modest wrinkles on the existing set, just so I can have 5 flavors of Evolving Wilds instead of basically 3. But they're not really adding anything novel or new. They're not really solving something fundamentally different about mana fixing at common. But those are the designs that come to mind for me. Like I want just these. I get why they keep going back to Evolving Wilds, but I really wish they would do a little wrinkle on that.
I mean, if nothing else, I just need them at some point to give me a different art for Terramorphic Expanse, because it's been reprinted like 30 times with the same art. I just want something new. But yeah, like when Ash Barrens was released, that pretty radically changed like the state of like constructed Pauper mana bases and slotted directly into Pauper cubes, because it's very close but not quite Evolving Wilds and does lead to a slightly different play pattern, which was really cool to see.
Yeah, that's been my favorite common land they printed in years. Just the ability to play enters the battlefield, untap land, and do its thing, or fix your mana, just hit a real sweet spot. Like that was clever design. It might actually be a little. I wonder, it probably not in a format with all like the dual lands we have today, but if there weren't quite so many ways to mana fix in standard right now, like it would be a very standard playable card, I think, in some formats.
Yeah, I was kind of honestly shocked that I think that's the one that card from a supplementary product I'm most expecting to at some point see reprinted in standard. It just, like, if we go back to a place where land cycling makes sense, that seems like a great just slot in auto include that fits that theme.
I'm going to call it now for Return to the Battle of Zendikar.
Oh God, no! We're done with Zendikar after the last pass. I think people are done. It was a bad limited format. But maybe I don't know if we ever go back to Amonkhet, but that's the most recent place we've seen cycling, and I guess Alara is the other one. But look, I just want to go back to a place where there's a chance that I get to see Astral Slide again. I just want it back. I miss it so badly.
Have you ever built the Astral Slide commander deck?
I've played the Zur cycling deck where you spend the first 20 minutes trying to convince everyone no, it's not that Zur, and then you spend the rest of the game forgetting every trigger because you have 1,000,001 things to remember. It was fun. Though to be fair, like the reason I love Astral Slide is distinctly like red white slide in like standard and extended. Like that is the deck I miss, and I hope one day they deem slide as an okay thing to bring back. But until then, I miss you, Astral Slide. I miss you so much. All right, so we're coming up on about a little over an hour, so we're probably going to wrap things up here. So, Stibbs, if you have anything else or anything you'd like to shill, point people towards, any of that good stuff, this is your chance for it.
Yeah, so if you're kind of curious about the Pauper Cube, you want to see a little bit more about it, you want to look at some of the recent updates and some of the content around it. It's nothing super wild. Let's be honest. It's a couple blog posts on a WordPress site, but the paupercube.com actually has all sorts of information around the cube. Link to the Discord where people talk. You can jump right into the conversations, ask questions. I'd love to. If you're looking at it for the first time and you're wondering like, why is this card here? Where is this card? Why haven't you done this? Mike brought up some great questions. Was that in the pre part?
Yeah.
Some great questions for if you're a patron, you can find out what Mike brought up that made me go, huh? I got to go back to that. But that's what I seek. I really am dedicated to feedback and making all the content available for free. There is a Patreon. Super if you like the cube, you want to kick towards it, but all the content, everything you need to know about the cube, all the updates, everything's always out there available for free. Nothing's gated to keep you from not enjoying the cube. That's really what I have to plug.
All right, wonderful. And where can people find you on social media? That's always the other one.
Yeah, so I'm _Stibbs, STYBS on Twitter. And on like 80 Discord servers, so you'll never actually get me outside of a direct message. But it's basically Twitter is where I am. I used to be a site runner for various different Magic sites over the years, but I've kind of decided to focus on some other things in life and kind of make a change there. And every now and then you'll see a Wizards article, but yeah, it's basically Twitter and Discord.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on this show. It was a absolute blast. I always love the chances I get to break the format of the show a little bit, talk about some cube, and it was a nice, enjoyable conversation. All right, I'm gonna take us on out of this show, and I usually don't do this outro, so I have no idea what's going on. All right. Thank you for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our patrons. Consider supporting us if you like the show. Check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us, where to find Stibbs, all that good stuff. We'd like to remind you, if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated as they help boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or an idea for a topic or anything you'd like to see on the show, feel free to contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to Pat's Games and L, who does our theme song, Quantitative. Till next week, this is Mike and Adam signing off for Color Commentary.